Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone around the world. I am Paul Sisler, and this is In the Moment. Oh my goodness, Silicon Bank has just gone bankrupt. Oh my God, prices are going up. Oh my God, what am I to do? What am I to do? Get a hold of your Stoic self. You'll get through it. Don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Hello, everyone. Today, Elizabeth Masters and myself are going to go over the second meditation. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. 54 years old and haven't had a bad day yet.
That's perfect. I'm glad to
Yes.
hear it.
Yes. I've had some bad situations and some bad moments, but never a bad day.
Yeah, that's important.
Yes. Yes. Now, last week, I missed you. Oh, I missed you.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I missed you too, and I'm just excited to be back.
That's right. I went through the last like four segments of the first meditation, and I saved the full second meditation for this week. It's got
Perfect.
16 parts, so we'll probably get through maybe if we're lucky the first eight, but these are a little bit longer, a little bit more complex, and a little more depth digging with them. So it might take a little bit longer than just 2 weekends to get through it. It might take us
Okay.
three. So I'm thinking we might get through maybe five or six today.
Okay. Well, we'll see where it takes us.
All right. So meditation two is of the nature of the human mind and that it is more easily known than the body. Or is it? I added the or is it to that. So
Right.
all right. The first meditation. I mean the first segment of this meditation. The meditation of yesterday has filled my mind with so many doubts that it is no longer in my power to forget them. Nor do I see, meanwhile, any principle on which they can be resolved. And just as I had fallen all of a sudden into a very deep water, I am so greatly disconcerted as to be unable either to plant my feet firmly on the bottom or sustain myself by swimming on the surface. Okay. Now, this is basically just where he's put himself. That the first meditation has got him just in such a tizzy that he's now got more questions than he had to begin with. And he's really not knowing where to begin, is what I take from this part.
Well, I think really what he's addressing here is the the wrenches that life can sort of throw at us, and situations that can really, you know, situations that can really cause us to doubt like our thinking, if we're doing the right thing, where we're going, what we're doing. Um and sometimes our doubts can be so um just prevalent in our minds that we focus more on those than you know what's really important, and it can just kind of knock us off kilter, and
Right,
we become confused and discombobulated and clouded. Our judgment's clouded, our thinking's clouded.
right. And I'm just going to kind of apply this on an everyday basis and all that,
Mhm.
as every day when we
Right.
encounter situations that so many things happen that we just don't know where to plant our feet to get started, and we can't swim to the surface and relax and just do that nice little backstroke because there's just so much going on that
Right.
there's just confusion. So he goes on with, I will nevertheless make an effort and try anew the same path on which I had entered yesterday. That is, proceed by casting aside all that admits of the slightest doubt, not less than if I had discovered it to be absolutely false. And I will continue always in this track until I find something that is certain, or at least, if I can do nothing more, until I shall know with certainty that there is nothing certain. Your viewpoint on this?
Um, well, for me, when he's talking about his meditations, he is addressing that he's gonna put those doubts aside and continue on the path that he was on and just sort of try to regain his footing.
Composure, yes.
Which is something that it's something very similar to what Stoics do. When they're sort of thrown off balance, they really sort of sort out what's in their control, what's not in their control, and we try to focus on what is. And he's relaying this, I think, more to the doubts with regards to the meditations and what he's questioning, but really it's applicable across all spectrums of life, pretty much.
Exactly. Because of everything that he had done the day before, not less than if I had discovered it to be absolutely false, I will continue always on this track. So, in casting aside anything and everything and just taking hold, it's like, okay, this is the first thing I'm going to deal with. Bam, here we are. And it's either going to be something that I can abstain to, or it's going to be something that I can cast aside as completely false. It's going to be, at least one or the other. And I'm going to go at it until I get there.
Right. He's sort of regrounding himself.
Right. Archimedes, that he might transport the entire globe from the place it occupied to another, demanded only a point that was firm and immovable. So also I shall be entitled to entertain the highest expectations, if I am unfortunate enough to discover only one thing that is certain and indubitable. So even if all we can get is just one certainty in life, if I rest my entire aspect on this one thing that I pull, that's going to be at least one answer I'm going to have. At least that's the way I take it. Like, no matter what, I'm at least going to have one certainty before I pass.
Right. So he's just looking for something concrete, something unshakable, something, unassailable, that he can stand firm on. And I think Stoics, do take this approach in some ways. Some of the meditations that I find that Descartes goes through is very different in, than how Stoics approach things.
Right.
The philosophy of Descartes and some of the philosophers that he studied, like Aristotle, they just looked at a broad range of things, metaphysics, all kinds of things, and they questioned everything. And where Stoics really are far more simplistic and minimalistic. And so we do sort of, do what Descartes is talking about here, and we analyze, what is true or not true, without assigning any judgment to it. But really, we look for these things more so in, everyday situations versus questioning everything as a whole, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Where Descartes differs from, I guess, what you would call your ancient Stoics, your Socrates, your Aristotles, Marcus Aurelius, all of these other Stoics and philosophers that, again, I like to refer back to the Pythagoreans, because they had a set guideline of virtues. They set this based upon, we know this, or at least we think we know this. So since this is what our conclusion is, this is what we're going to stick with until something else arises.
Right.
Okay. And what Rene Descartes is trying to do is go that one step beyond, you might say. I have to know for absolute certain to where I won't change my mind later down the road. And because things change. I was in a space last night, and they were kind of, you had some of these people that they believe in this old way of thinking that once I've established, I can't change it. Okay.
Right.
And the one thing that Rene Descartes tried to do is say, well, let's look deeper. Let's see if we can change it. But they're coming from different perspectives when they do this,
Right.
where the older ones are like, this is what I confront right now. Let me deal with it now. Where the newer ones that are saying, let's find the absolute.
Right.
And there isn't, because things change. So
Not always. Yeah, that's correct.
yep. All right. So that was the first one. Here we go on to number 2. I suppose, accordingly, that all the things which I see are false. I believe that none of those objects which my fallacious memory represents ever existed. I suppose that I possess no senses. I believe that body, figure, extension, motion, and place are merely fictions of my mind. What is there then that can be esteemed true? Perhaps this only, that there is absolutely nothing certain. Okay. So what he's doing here is he's casting a doubt that anything is real. That anything that I can see, anything that I can touch, taste, smell, hear, it's all fake. None of it's real. I'm just in this dream. And this is where I am. So the only thing that at this moment that I can therefore conclude that may be real, but we're not going to talk about this, is the fact that I'm thinking. Okay. So outside of that, anything beyond thinking isn't real. It's all a dream. Is that your take?
That's what I take him to be saying. And I think this is where, Stoics differ from some of the philosophers like Rene Descartes and some of the earlier philosophers. You know, they question the reality of everything to find the absolutes and the uncertainties. But it's just not something that Stoics focus on. This is not how Stoics think. Stoics aren't concerned with, any of these things. And so, yes, I do agree with you, though, that this is what he's doing, calling doubt into everything.
Right. Now, as a philosopher, this is something that should be looked at. Okay. It's not something that should be focused on,
Right.
but it's something that should be looked at. Everyone should question their existence, and once you've gone through the routine of questioning your existence, and you can deal then with what the reality is that's facing you right now, it's best to go on with reality and not continue your focus of study on, am I in a real world?
Right.
But this is why I like Rene Descartes, is because as a philosopher, it's a great read, and it's a great entertainment of the mind to get you thinking, to make you ask questions, and it gives you a different perspective of asking questions. It makes you think about things a little more.
It does.
So let's go on with number 3. Okay. But how do I know that there is not something different altogether from the objects I have now enumerated, of which it is impossible to entertain the slightest doubt? Is there not a God or some being, by whatever name I may designate him, who causes these thoughts to arise in my mind? Now, I like this because it's like, this is a questioning of a God.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be God. It could be any deity. It could be good. It could be evil. It could be whatever your belief system is. Okay. Is it possible that you aren't you, and everything that is being put in there is from some outside source. And this is what he's questioning right here. Are my thoughts my own?
Yeah. Eh, I agree with you. Like he is calling into question everything, including God, and what the basis is for the belief in God, and how can he work out like what what drives his belief and his faith.
Yes, yes. Here's where the next line comes in. But why suppose such a being? For it may be I myself am capable of producing them, and then at least not something. But I before denied that I possess senses or a body. I hesitate, however, for what follows from that. Okay,
Right.
so let me reread this one more time. But why suppose such a being? Now, really think about that. Why suppose? So, in other words, I'm thinking about a being. Why suppose? But why suppose such a being? For it may be I myself am capable of producing them. Am I then at least not something? So, with that, he's saying, if there isn't a God and I can have these thoughts, am I the one capable of producing this?
Right.
But I before denied that I possessed senses or a body. I hesitate, however, from what follows from that. So then he goes on. Am I so independent on the am I sorry. Am I so dependent on the body and the senses that without these I cannot exist? Okay. Now, this is where we go more into, am I a soul? Am I a spirit or something like that?
Mhm.
Do I need my body to continue to exist? Am I more than my body? Am I more than the sum of my parts?
Right. Yeah, he's really calling into question where our existence begins and where it ends. Pretty
Yes.
much.
Yes. But I had the persuasion that there was absolutely nothing in the world, that there was no sky and no earth, neither minds nor bodies. Was I not, therefore, at the same time persuaded that I did not exist? So, this is kind of where the error in this thought process comes. Because if you don't exist, how are you thinking?
Exactly, and that's the next point that he brings up, So if I've convinced myself of something, then certainly I must have existed.
Right. Far from it. I assuredly existed since I was persuaded. But there is, I know not what being who is possessed at once of the highest power and the deepest cunning, who is constantly employing all of his ingenuity into deceiving me. In other words, if I am the only one, okay, would there be a deviant creature out there that is so powerful and so everything that they would spend so much time convincing me of all of these things just to play a game, basically?
Right.
That's how I perceive it.
Yeah, exactly, and I think it's also in his mind proving his point that if there is this being who's deceiving him, surely he must have existed to be deceived.
Yes, exactly.
So he is basically coming up with point after point for why he actually exists and proving that he is actually existing versus
Not
not
exist.
existing,
Yes,
not a dream.
exactly. Doubtless, then, I exist since I am deceived, and let him deceive me as he may. He can never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I shall be conscious that I am something. which goes to point, the fact that, again, without saying it, I think, therefore I am.
Right. And that's the last, point of this meditation. If you go on to keep reading, that's what he says. I must finally conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist,
Yeah. So that it must, in fine, be maintained, all things being maturely and carefully considered, that this preposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time it is expressed by me or conceived in my mind. And with that, I absolutely agree. I mean, the route that he went there is a good route. It's a good breakdown of everything. And it's not so much erroneous as it is long-winded to try to get to that point. I think, therefore I am. And the narrative that he creates arguably isn't a it's a valid argument. It's just not a sound argument.
Right. And this isn't an approach that Stoics would really take. I mean, this is very, very different from Stoic thinking. And I just want to point this out. I want to try to work a little bit more of Stoicism in with Rene Descartes so that people who are watching can understand that this is really a contrast to Stoic thinking.
Yes.
And like Paula said before, we have to understand what isn't Stoic, to know, what is. But this Stoics wouldn't really focus on this. Stoics would look at their existence and how they exist within nature, but don't really go to this level of questioning,
Exactly.
how, our existence.
Exactly, because we go through the pain and hardships of everyday life. So with that which is real that we experience, and whether you want to go with the line of thinking that Rene Descartes is trying to institute here, what if it is all just a dream? What if I am in the Matrix?
Yeah.
What if that is the case? There's some mad scientist just playing around with my brain. Well, then so be it. The fact that I think I still am.
Right.
So it's irrelevant if it's a scientist playing with my brain or if I'm in the Matrix or whatever the case may be. I still have to deal with the shit here. This is my reality. Right. So I'm going to deal with that. And that's where the Stoicism comes in. The Stoics dealing with what is in front of me now versus what could be.
Yeah, no. Stoics really, don't really take those things into consideration. They don't spend a lot of time pondering these things. I mean, you could be a very deep thinking person, but at the end of the day, Stoics just tend to focus on our existence is our existence. Like, there's no denying our existence. We just take what's thrown at us and decide how we're going to deal with it in a way that brings about the most peace. We don't really need to focus on, how did I get here? Or it's, or am I really here? Like, that's just, I find Rene Descartes' writings to be very amusing because of how different it is.
But as a philosopher, okay, now I'm going to take you back, because remember, the name of this show is Becoming Stoic.
Correct.
Okay, so I want everyone to take a step back for a second. If you're going to be somebody that's going to become a Stoic, first you have to become a little more philosophical in life and look at things with a critical thinking aspect. And someone that is a critical thinker, Rene Descartes is a good study plan.
Sure.
You should read Rene Descartes, because that's only going to improve upon your critical thinking skills.
Right.
And you need those critical thinking skills. But do not spend a lot of time on Rene Descartes trying to break down the thought process, because it is not worth your time. Okay. It's a good read. Read it a couple times. I've read this book here probably about, I'd say 4 or 5 times. Yeah. And I pick up something new from it every time. And that is the thing. You're going to pick something up that's going to help you along the way. it's not going to improve upon your stoicism, but it is going to improve upon your philosophical abilities, which in the long run, the greater your philosophical abilities are, the greater of a stoic you're going to become.
Right. And he does work a lot of Stoic principles into his thinking and his writing, particularly further down the line.
Yes.
You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we are on number 4. But I do not yet know with sufficient clearness what I am, though assured that I am, and hence, in the next place, I must take care, lest perchance I inconsiderately substitute some other object in room of what is properly myself, and thus wander from truth, even in that knowledge, cognition, which I hold to be of all others the most certain and evident. What is your take on that?
I think that he is just basically saying that he just doesn't sufficiently understand what I means. Like, who am I? What am I? What is my purpose? And so I think that that's, something that he is exploring.
Yes. And I think unnecessarily, because I inconsiderately substitute some other object in room of what is properly myself, and thus wander from the truth. So
I think for me, when I read this passage, I don't just think about, him exploring what I means, like what I am in the physical sense. And I think that this could be where, it's somewhat aligned with Stoicism. When you're defining the I, like what is I, what does it mean? You can look at it like, who am I? What is my purpose? Which is something that Stoics do focus a lot on. A big part of Stoicism is really understanding, knowing who you are, what your purpose is, finding your purpose, and figuring out how that exists within nature, within the community, and sort of developing the best parts of yourself, to make yourself the best that you can be. And so for Stoics, it's really important to reflect on the I and to figure out, where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are, and how you continually can improve to be, just a good person, live a virtuous life. So I think this is particularly important to Stoics.
Yes, it is, because it's about self-discovery and knowing who I am. And you can't be helpful to anyone else if you don't know who you are and what you are. And once you love yourself, and you can't love someone else until you love yourself. So how can you know someone else if you don't even know who you are? So this is probably the most Stoic aspect of Rene Descartes' meditations right here. For this reason, I will now consider anew what I formerly believed myself to be, before I entered on the present train of thought. And my previous opinion, I will retrench all that can in the least be invalidated by the grounds of doubt I have adduced, in order that there may be length remain nothing but what is certain and indubitable. Boy, I read that really, really badly.
You can read it again if you want to.
For this reason, I will now consider anew what I formerly believed myself to be, before I entered on the present train of thought. And my previous opinion, I will retrench all that can in the least be invalidated by the grounds of doubt I have adduced, in order that there may may at length remain nothing but what is certain and indubitable. So basically, the things that he knows about himself that he knows that isn't him, he can throw out and go to the things that he does know about himself and then try to figure out if there's truth behind that, is my take on it.
Right. I think he wants to cast aside anything that, can, be doubted, anything, any aspects of himself that can be weakened, and he wants to um sort of purge that, so that at the end everything that he discovers about himself is certain, unshakable, it
Boom.
inarguable.
Right. He wants to make sure that his foundation is a solid one. He
Correct.
doesn't want any cracks in his own foundation. He wants to be who he is and not what he's presumed to be.
Right.
So that moves us on to number 5. And hello, Shadow Fox. Hiya.
Hi, Shadow Fox.
Number 5. What did I formerly think I was? Undoubtedly, I judged that I was a man. But what is a man? Shall I say a rational animal? Assuredly not, for it would be necessary forthwith to inquire into what is meant by animal and what by ration, and thus from a single question I should insensibly glide into others, and these more difficult than the first. Nor do I now possess enough of leisure to warrant me in wasting my time amid subtleties of this sort. This is kind of where the biblical aspect comes into play, because biblically, we're not animals. We're the controllers of animals. So when he says, assuredly, he's not an animal, this is the perspective that he's coming from, is that he's not a lesser being. He's not a lesser thing, which science tells us, yes, we are animals. But in his mindset, no, I'm not an animal. I am above that. So how do you intake this?
Well, there's definitely a, delineation between humans and animals here. And I think part of that we have to consider, who the author is and the time that they lived. And so the knowledge base was not the same.
Correct.
So really what he's calling into question here is physically, what is he?
Right.
And just working out, you know, the physicality of being a human. I am not really sure how to interpret that any differently.
Right. Right. There's definitely a superiority aspect to it,
Mhm.
because Rene
Yes.
Descartes thought he was very superior to a lot of people. As you read more into Rene Descartes, this you'll see he does have a superiority complex, and
Yes.
this is what you're reading right here is a superiority complex.
Right. I think right here is where, and you'll see it as we go more through the passage, but here is where he's separating the physical from the emotional, and when he separates the physical from the soul, um, and really where he sort of works out, you know, the combining or the meshing of the two.
Right, right. I prefer here to attend to the thoughts that sprung up of themselves in my mind and were inspired by my own nature alone when I applied myself to the consideration of what I was. In the first place, then, I thought that I possessed a countenance, hands, arms, and all the fabric of members that appears in a corpse, and which I called by the name of body. It further occurred to me that I was nourished, that I walked, perceived, and thought, And all those actions I referred to the soul. Okay. So this is where that separation comes in. Okay. The members of the body is the body, the arms, the hands, the feet, um, the nourishment and the perceiving of walking and having thoughts. That is the soul. So this is exactly as you said. This is the separation of body and mind.
Right. I think really, and you'll see as we go a little bit further into the passage, that this is where he sort of determines that he's certain about the body, but he is not certain about the origin of thinking and the soul. He sort of compares it to something like wind, or, he's not certain that the body is what is responsible for these things. And he is trying to work out if the soul and the body are separate, and if the soul and the thinking and consciousness um, is something that comes, externally, like that's not produced internally.
Right. And this is one of the, when you get into the philosophical world, what he presents is one of the best arguments in relation to the mind body problem, because, yes, that's a problem in the philosophical world, that the mind and the body are two separate things, thus, dualism. And the materialist believes that the mind and the body are one and the same. So when you die and you're a materialist, that's just it. You're done. That's the end. Nothing else happens. If you're a dualist, the body dies and the mind goes on. So I just thought I'd get that in there. But what the soul itself was, I either did not stay to consider, or if I did, I imagined that it was something extremely rare and subtle, like wind or flame or ether, spread through my grosser parts. As regarded the body, I did not even doubt of its nature, but thought I distinctly knew it. And if I had wished to describe it according to the notions I then entertained, I should have explained myself in this manner. Now, here he goes with the explanation. By body, I understand all that can be terminated by a certain figure, that can be compromised in a certain place, and so fill a certain space as therefrom to exclude every other body. That can be perceived either by touch, sight, hearing, taste, or smell. That can be moved in different ways, not indeed of itself, but by something foreign to it by which it is touched, and from which it receives the impression. For the power of self motion, and likewise that of perceiving and thinking, I held as by no means pertaining to the nature of body. On the contrary, I was somewhat astonished to find such faculties existing in some bodies. Thoughts?
I, again, just, as I stated before, I think he's just trying to determine um, how the mind works, how the soul, what the soul is,
Yes.
and how thoughts, affect the body, where they come from, how the two work in conjunction. He does um dive into the mind body problem, um but these are sort of questions that um I think I, from a modern perspective, don't really understand. Like, I understand his questions and I understand his philosophies, but
Right.
it's difficult for me to relate to them.
Yes. Because again, on an everyday basis, we're not separating and trying to figure out what is my
Right.
body and what is my soul. What
Right.
aspects of me are my soul? Um, whether you're of a religious nature or you're of a, you know, creation nature, a spiritual nature, whatever the aspect may be, whether you consider yourself to have spirit, soul, or whatever, by whatever name you may give that aspect of yourself. We, for the most part, the majority of human beings see the thinking aspect of self differently than from the functioning aspect of self, where
Right.
the body itself, yes, I can move my hands, I can blink my eyes, I can, touch my head, touch my
Right.
hair, and all this stuff. And I can feel, I can smell, I can taste, I can hear, I can see. Okay. So we attribute the senses as part of the soul because we utilize them to tell the body what to do.
Right.
But there's also the aspects of the body that function without us thinking about it, such as the heart. It's there pumping. We're not thinking about making every heartbeat pump. We're breathing just naturally. We're not thinking that, okay, I have to inhale, I have to exhale. Oh wait, I
Right.
got to inhale again. Okay, we're not thinking about these things. Our body just simply does it. So he's trying to make the differential attributes of which parts are going to be connected to the soul, which parts are going to be connected to the body, and where do you draw the line? Which, quite frankly, you really can't draw a line because we're not there. We don't know the metaphysical composition of soul and body.
Right.
So, and until we have some device that can pick that apart and know exactly what's what, we're just going to make our own assumptions on what we believe according to our belief system. So it's belief.
Right. And yeah, and I think that he is here just can't conceive that, any physical part of the body is capable of producing thoughts, feelings, anything having to do with senses.
Right.
And so, he is really, trying to put his finger on that. And you know, like he says, for according to my judgment, the power of self movement, like the power of sensation or thought, was quite foreign to the nature of a body. Um, so for him, he can't conceive that the two are, coexist, or even, the body is responsible for that. And it creates just a sense of wonder in him, um, that bodies actually contain these kinds of faculties. So, it's interesting to see, um, his path of discovery, so to speak, that he
Right.
takes
Right.
in analyzing this.
Yes. So here we go now on to number 6. But as to myself, what can I now say that I am? Since I suppose there exists an extremely powerful and, if I may so speak, malignant being whose whole endeavors are directed towards deceiving me, can I affirm that I possess any one of those attributes of which I have lately spoken as belonging to the nature of body? After attentively considering them in my own mind, I find none of them that can properly be said to belong to myself. Hmm. So, this is where, if the being is malignant and it's all just being put into his head, these things that he imagines aren't self.
Right.
So,
So,
this is like the separation.
you know, it's really difficult from a modern age to really make sense because we have so much more knowledge of how the body functions, and
Right.
what controls our senses and what controls our thoughts, and you
Yes.
know so to look at it from a 16th or 17th century perspective is sort of difficult to wrap my head around at times.
Yes.
And so,
Renee, just watch one MRI and you'll know exactly what's going on in there. Just look at an MRI.
right. So I think again, but this just goes back to him sort of trying to figure out, um, where these thoughts exist, where they come from, you know, how they affect the body and, how do they affect what we do.
Right. One of the key issues that you just pointed out, though, and we have to remember that during the time that this was written, they didn't have this medical technology that we have today. So,
Correct.
so what we look at when we're looking at this and we're hearing him like, well, dude, just why didn't you just go to the hospital? Well, because they didn't have the technology. So for them to question this kind of stuff would have been normal in that time. Whereas today, we have broader knowledge of the workings of the body and the mind, as you said.
Right. And as Stoics, we don't really concentrate on where the thoughts come from in terms of like where they originate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we kind of do, but not in the same way that Rene Descartes is trying to figure it out.
Right.
He's trying to figure out like where the existence of thoughts or feelings or perceptions come from. Whereas Stoics, we're not concerned with that. What we're concerned with in terms of where thoughts originate from is like, do we have these thoughts as a response to an external or an internal event that's going on? Like, we're concerned with making sure that our thoughts are healthy, that our thoughts are, in alignment with things that are going to bring about a peaceful, life, a virtuous life, having thoughts that not only benefit ourselves, but benefit the community around us, and creating balance and making sure that our thoughts are balanced. So, Stoics really don't go down this rabbit hole.
No, they don't. They're going to go more towards like the laws of contradiction and non-contradiction, or they're going to go more with like free will versus determinism. They're not going
Right,
to go this route. So,
right.
but let's get through. Let's get through Renee.
Right. Well, I think it's important for people to understand where the difference is, and we'll get there when we start looking at some of these Stoic philosophies. But
Yeah.
it's helpful for people watching to know that, for people who maybe aren't familiar with Stoicism or want to, seek more of an understanding, these are not generally the things that are focused on, you know.
Is there a preferred translation of on First Philosophy you suggest? Yes, John Veitch. It's simplified the best way that it can be simplified. Trust me on this, because without his simplification, you're going to be reading Descartes going, WTF, OMG, what is he trying to say here?
Yeah.
This
It's
does
very Shakespearean
yes.
the way it's written.
Yeah, yes. I mean, this is the most simplified version that you're going to get that makes any sense at all. Okay. So here, where was I? After tentatively considering them in my own mind, I find none of them can properly be said to belong to myself. Okay, I already did that. To recount them were idle and tedious. Let us pass then to the attributes of the soul. The first mentioned were the powers of nutrition and walking. But if it be true that I have no body, it is true likewise that I am capable neither of walking nor of being nourished. Perception is another attribute of the soul. But perception too is impossible without the body. Besides, I have frequently during sleep believed that I perceived objects which I afterward observed I did not in reality perceive. Thinking is another attribute of the soul, and here I discover that properly belongs to myself. This alone is inseparable from me. I am, I exist. This is certain, but how often? Now, this is where Rene Descartes is putting how you see things, how you hear things, how you smell things, that your five senses are actually part of the soul, not of the human body. Okay? Because you perceive through your eyes. You need nourishment, and you can't do that without a body. So then it must be a soul that you can smell. Okay? So basically, the soul can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. So when you're actually holding the glass, it's the soul that's allowing you to feel the glass that you're holding, not your body. It's your soul. Your body has no way to feel. Okay? So this separation that he makes versus, like we were talking with today's technology, we know how the nerves work. We know how, when light is refracted and goes into the optical, on how it's turned, everything's upside down. Our brain turns it right side up, and we see as we see because of what our body does for us, not our soul, but our body. So, thoughts?
My thoughts here were I sort of felt like Rene Descartes was sort of coming to the conclusion, or starting to come to the conclusion at least, that the soul resides within the body and that none of these things are possible without the body, almost like the soul needs the body in order to perform the functions of the senses. And
Right.
so he's coming to the conclusion that, he must exist in his physical form in order to do these things. However, they're separate but together, if that makes sense.
Symbiotic. Yes.
Yeah, the best way that I could put it is the soul residing within the body. That's how I interpreted this passage in its entirety, which
Right.
people may see when we finish the
Yes.
passage.
As often as I think, for perhaps it would even happen, if I should wholly cease to think, that I should at the same time altogether cease to be. I now admit nothing that is not necessarily true. I am therefore, precisely speaking, only a thinking thing, that is, a mind, mens, civ, animus, understanding or reason, terms whose signification was before unknown to me. I am, however, a real thing and really exist. But what thing? The answer was a thinking thing. Exactly. Again, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
I am a thinking thing.
Correct.
We move on to 7. The question now arises, am I aught besides? I will stimulate my imagination with a view to discover whether I not still something more than a thinking being. Now it is plain I am not the assemblage of members called the human body. I am not a thin and penetrating air diffused through all these members, or wind, or flame, or vapor, or breath, or any of all the things I can imagine. For I suppose that all these were not, and without changing the supposition, I find that I still feel assured of my existence. But it is true, perhaps, that those very things which I suppose to be not existent, because they are unknown to me, are not in truth different from myself, whom I know.
I think, this is where he sort of explores, like, prior to the question he was asking was, or what he was attributing, uh, the mind to be, or where thoughts came from, was something external like the wind. But, I think here is, where he's starting to say that no, he's not something vapor which permeates the wind and sort of controls the body.
Right.
I think he's starting to, go down that road of, okay, really, this is coming from an internal place within the body,
Yeah.
which, you know, for a lot of people, it can be confusing to follow along with the thoughts because they're here and then here and then here. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
And
definitely.
yeah,
That's why when you do read Rene Descartes, you're going to have to read through it more than one time because
yeah,
you're going to be left with more questions than you had going into it.
right.
And the more you read it, the more it'll start to make some sense
Right.
as to where he's going. Because Rene Descartes jumps around.
He
Okay.
does.
His thought process is scattering and tangent. Okay. And he tries to bring it back, and he can be successful sometimes, but for the most part, I think he leaves too many open ends. And of course, that's going to go into questions and replies. So
Right.
this is a point I cannot determine and do not now enter into any dispute regarding it. I can only judge of things that are known to me. I am conscious that I exist, and who know that I exist inquire into what I am. It is, however, perfectly certain that the knowledge of my existence, thus precisely taken, is not dependent on things, the existence of which is yet unknown to me, and consequently, it is not dependent on any of the things I can feign in imagination. Moreover, the phase itself, I frame an image, reminds me of my error. For I should in truth frame one if I were to imagine myself to be anything, since to imagine is nothing more than to contemplate the figure or image of a corporeal thing. But I already know that I exist, and that it is possible at the time that all those images, and in general, all that relates to the nature of body, are merely dreams. So, if he still has this malignant creature manipulating him, then everything is still make believe. Nothing is real. He's imagined all of it. Okay.
Right.
So none of it exists, but yet here I am. I still think. Therefore, I still am.
Right.
So, how do you go beyond this point? Well, the only way to go beyond this point is that you're not controlled by a malignant thing now, are you?
No.
Exactly. All right, I'm going to finish up number 7 here. We got a little further than what I thought. So, because we're coming up on that wonderful hour. From this, I discover that it is not more reasonable to say, I will excite my imagination that I may know more distinctly what I am, than to express myself as follows. I am now awake and perceive something real, but because my perception is not sufficiently clear, I will of express purpose go to sleep, that my dreams may represent to me the object of my perception with more truth and clearness. And therefore, I know that nothing of all that I can embrace in imagination belongs to the knowledge which I have of myself, and that there is need to recall with the utmost care the mind from this mode of thinking, that it may be able to know its own nature with perfect distinctness.
I think here he is just saying that, it would be silly to rely on the imagination to determine, you know, what he is, who he is. And
Mm-hmm.
that it would be like saying, if I were to fall asleep and go into a dream state, that will give me, you know, um, a sense of who I am. And really, it's pertaining more to the ego than anything else. And so I think here he's just saying that he really needs to consider what he is, who he is within nature. And, that's the only way to figure it out. That's what I get from the passage.
Yeah, basically, Shadow Fox ego. Yes, this is where Rene Descartes has now determined that he's not controlled by a malignant being,
Right.
and he's not in a state of dream. And anything that he gets from dream is just imagination. It's not anything. It's not real. It's not.
It's liable.
Yeah. So now I'm awake. So now in my awoke state, who am I? What am I? And that's what we will get into next week, the awakened state.
Great.
Yes. And I expressly say awakened in a multitude of ways. But anyways. Oh, Elizabeth, this has been a great revisit to Rene Descartes.
It has.
Yes. So basically what we've covered today on this is that Rene Descartes just spent those 7 parts of the second meditation describing what it is to be controlled in a dream state by a malignant being. Now, I want you to make
and that
note.
Is full.
Yes. Now, I want you to make note that in his comparison, we're not going to be going over what if we were controlled in a dream state by an almighty deity. Now, do take note that the dream state is controlled by evil, while the awakened state is controlled by good. I want you to think about that for our next episode.
I can't wait.
Let's see. Hello, Diana. We got Diana who has popped in to say hello. We have T-Paul. Oh, T-Paul's got a question here. What makes Stoic from non-Stoic different here with being awake versus dreaming? What makes Stoic from non-Stoic different here with being awake versus dreaming? I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
I think Stoics don't really focus on the dream state. So, I mean, we don't spend a lot of time talking about dreams and, if dreams play a part in who we are. Stoicism is a much more simplistic philosophy that focuses on mindfulness and basically just living your best life, like constantly improving, fine-tuning yourself, living a life of peace and balance, making sure that in the most simplistic way to describe it is to make sure that we have good thoughts, virtuous thoughts. We live a virtuous life. We do good. And the satisfaction in our life comes from doing good and living a virtuous life, and living, a peaceful, harmonious life in which, we don't focus on what's out of our control. We focus on what's in our control, and we don't allow our emotions to control us. And so this isn't really something that Stoics spend a lot of time thinking about or talking about or pondering. So that's what makes it a difficult question to answer.
Stoics aren't going to. Okay. Let me take the first part of the question. What makes Stoic from non-Stoic different? Let me explain that. Stoic is somebody that is trying to be the best possible human being, living a virtuous life. And instead of complaining about going through the hardships of life and the pain of life, they just dredge through it and they keep their emotions at bay. Okay. That's your Stoic. The non-Stoic is the one that is, and I mean the absolute non-Stoic, I'm talking the most non-Stoic you could be, would be someone that is always just complaining, always talking about how horrible everything is. I'll reframe it. Let's see here. Whoops. No, 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 no. There we go. Okay. I'll reframe it. What is the difference between stoicism and non-stoicism in terms of being awake versus dreaming, especially if you say dreaming is evil and awake being good? Okay. Now I kind of get what you're getting at here. Rene Descartes is questioning self. I am what is real. And he's put the perspective that the dream state is controlled by an evil, malignant deity, where the awake state is controlled by God, all powerful, all knowing. So that in itself has nothing to do with Stoicism. Okay.
Right.
This is just Rene Descartes trying to define self. What am I? Okay. A Stoic would not waste time trying to break this analytical aspect down, especially in this way. Okay.
Right.
The Stoics going to look more towards empirical data and science and say, okay, well, this is how the mind and body works. This is the way it is. Is the soul and the body different? Doesn't matter. Okay. With the Stoic, it doesn't matter if the mind and body is the same or different, because the Stoic is going to live a good life. And basically, if there is a God, that God's going to be pleased with me. If there is no God, I've lost nothing and I've caused no harm. So the non-Stoic is going to be more worried about that soul. Where is my soul going to go? And that's where they can get caught up in the rhetoric of things that aren't real, because critical thinking is not a part of their thought process. The critical thinker is going to break these things down and analyze it to a different aspect. And if you're a person that is spiritual or religious or whatever, it's not so much the empirical data, but as to what you feel, what you have experienced, and what you know. So that's where, again, you got to keep your emotions in check and go forward and utilize the tools that you have. So the Stoic is going to keep going forward and try to do right by everybody else and learn themselves, where the non-Stoic is going to whine and cry and complain and bicker, may cause harm to others, really doesn't care who they hurt. And then, of course, you got the in-between, those people that, are Stoic and don't know it, are trying to become better people, trying to become more Stoic. So this is where that differential comes in. I hope I answered your question.
I just want to chime in for a second too, because now I understand the question a little bit better. So we're not really saying dreaming is evil, and being awake is good. That was a
Rene
path that
Descartes.
Rene Descartes took. And
Right.
so Stoics don't look at dreaming as being evil and being awake is good. And I think it's important to note that Rene Descartes is not a Stoic. He does
Correct.
incorporate some Stoic principles in his philosophy, but he is not considered a Stoic. But Stoics tend to try not to assign good or bad labels to things are what they are.
Right.
And Stoics focus more on working around those things. Certainly there are negative things that happen in life, or there are negative things that impact us. We have situations that aren't, really what we would call all that good. But really it's not about focusing on the good and the bad. It's focusing on, not allowing how we feel about those things to control us, and to be able to work through them outside of our emotions, to put the emotions on the shelf and work outside, work around them, and to learn from these things, and to be able to be at peace no matter what, because there are going to be things that happen that are out of our control that are going to negatively impact us. It's what we do with it. So, in terms of the difference between stoicism and non-stoicism and being awake versus dreaming, I think it's pretty much understood that dreaming is something that happens in our subconscious state. Stoics look at things logically and reasonably, and, basically use critical thinking and, higher cognitive functions to sort of manage everyday life and to figure these things out. So this would never be something that Stoics, I mean, maybe if they had a dream that was symbolic or something that was going on in their life, they might analyze it to
Right.
see like why they were dreaming something, but it would never be looked at in this way.
Right.
It doesn't care.
And I myself who analyzes my dreams, because it's your subconscious talking to you. Depending upon your belief system, you could have spirit guides, stuff like that are communicating with you. And even a stoic's going to look at that, but we're not going to put our entire life's focus on that one dream we couldn't figure out.
Right.
And the aspect of dreaming as evil and awake as being good, this is the aspect that Rene Descartes put it in, not what we're putting in it. Rene Descartes used that aspect, and that's what we'll talk about more next week. That's what Rene Descartes did. Diana says, I was offered to move in with a man once years ago. I had dreams every night about cockroaches, which I detest. In the week, I took to decide. All right.
That was definitely your mind talking to you.
Yes, your mind saw something and told you, hey, no, cockroach. Bryce, Stoics seek tranquility through applied virtue and believe a lived philosophy is the only useful philosophy to follow, much like Socrates thought. Correct.
And
No,
Rene Descartes doesn't, I mean, he doesn't follow that philosophy.
correct. Yes. What he's saying here and all that, and believe a lived philosophy is the only useful philosophy. Okay. You can develop a multitude of philosophies. Everybody is a philosopher. Just know this. Everybody on this earth. When you ask a question, you are a philosopher because you're wanting to obtain knowledge. And the more you ask, the more of a philosopher you become. The more you question, the more of a philosopher you become. The more you doubt, the more you seek answers, the more you seek to know, the better the philosopher you become. Okay. Rene Descartes lived a philosophy and is now questioning all that he lived and is trying to sum it up at the end. That's not how a Stoic does things. I was going to save that for the end of Rene Descartes, but hey, we'll mention it again.
We'll revisit it. We'll get back to that.
Yes. Diana, when I decided not to move in with him, the dream stopped. There you go. Okay. Let's see. Because good and bad is by and large based on perspective, allowing that everyone is allowed their own perspective is Stoic. Yes. Yes. Allowing that everyone is allowed their own perspective. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. I mean, good and bad for the most part is relative. What may be good for somebody may not be good for somebody else. What may be bad for somebody may not be bad for somebody else. Really, what it comes down to is, what kind of life are you living? A lot of people would associate the word virtuous with the word good. But really, that's just circumstantial. So, yeah.
If you want to put a label on good and evil, there's truly only one way to do that. If you truly want to define it, harm. If it harms somebody, it's not good. If it doesn't harm somebody, then more than likely it is good. Now, that doesn't mean what is harmful to you may not be harmful to me. Okay. So now you have to look at what is harmful to who. And that's where different things like standing on the edge of a cliff isn't harmful to me. Even though I'm scared of heights, I'm going to approach that cliff with caution and I'm going to stand there. And if I feel like I'm secure, I'm not going to have an issue with it. But somebody else, they may not be able to go to that cliff's edge. Okay. And trying to drag them out there would be harmful to them. So, standing on the edge of a cliff, is it good or evil? Depends upon the process of getting there. Okay. Violation of free will. Diana, I love you. I love you. That comes into free will versus determinism. And when we're talking about a violation of free will, um, my free will is to go out and beat the first person I see half to death. Okay. To disallow me that free will to do that, is that a violation of me? Without harm. There we go. Again, it comes back to harm. So a violation of someone's free will that is harmful, yes. If it's not, then no. So that's when you break it down and you have to look at, first do no harm. I mean, first do no harm. That's basically what, if human beings were to first do no harm, then we would be living in a currency of love. And we're not there yet. We as human beings, we are not there yet. Are there a few of us that are trying to live in the currency of love? Absolutely. I know I do.
I think that's a question that is one to keep on the books and to discuss further, because it's a very broad and general question.
Mm-hmm.
Because one could ask, is a violation of one's free will inherently harmful, whether the intention is harm or not? But then you have to consider circumstances like work or school or any environment where there's some sort of authority over you, where you're required to do something is not basically of your own free will. And so I don't know what's behind that question, because I think there are different ways you could look at it. So the question is a little broad for me, and I think it's something that we could definitely explore further down the line.
Oh, we definitely will, because we're going to delve down the road. We will delve into free will itself and what it is and what it means to have free will and what we're entitled to and what we're not. And then I want to explore again, it's something that a lot of Stoics explore, is free will versus determinism, because that's a good argument to have, and I can't wait until we delve into that. We'll probably take one or two episodes to go into that, because there's a lot of debates when it comes to free will and what it means, who should have it, who shouldn't have it, when it should be violated, when it shouldn't be violated. As the example I gave, if I wanted to go out and beat up the next person and I'm told that I can't do that because it's a violation of my free will. Let's say for a moment that, okay, we're not going to violate anybody's free will. Now I do that, but now me beating up the person is violating their free will. So there's always lines that we have to draw
Yeah.
in the sand somewhere. Where do we draw them? When does the violation of someone's free will, when is it justified? Because everybody has their free will violated at some point in their life. Okay. Everybody does. So when is it justified? When is it not? When is it harmful? When is it not? Let's see. Isn't it still free will in the work scenario? You could choose to quit.
Well, yeah, and if I may, because I brought that up, it is still free will. And this is sort of these are sort of the questions that you have to ask as you go through and consider these things. Yes, it would be because you are making a conscious choice to work for a company that has certain rules, and you're making a free and conscious choice to follow those rules. So it is an act of free will. So there's sort of like a fine line, I think, there.
Well, and rules violate free will because
They do.
it's something that you may want to do, but the rule says you can't do it.
Mhm.
Bosses violate free will because they say you have to be to work on time, when I would much rather show up a half an hour late and get paid for it. But I mean,
But it's a choice to work there knowing that these restrictions are in place. So,
right. All
yeah.
right, Diana. I will keep asking questions, so you might want to end the podcast. I love you, Diana. I love you. Okay. We will when one's free will circumvents another's free will, and that will be the addressed issue at a later time. I love you, Diana. Thank you again, Elizabeth. Great show. Great show. Sorry we went over a little bit, but hey, sometimes it'll lead us to that. And I appreciate you staying.
No, it was my pleasure.
All right. All right, everyone. Remember, be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way.
See you guys next time.